What if Eden was never humanity's final destination, but only the starting point? Because there is one detail in Genesis that almost no one talks about. God never told Adam and Eve that they would remain in the garden forever. He gave them a very different command. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And here we encounter a question that completely changes the biblical story. What if Adam and Eve had never sinned and had actually fulfilled that mission? Because perhaps the greatest what if in the entire Bible isn't imagining a world without death. It's imagining a perfect civilization expanding Eden until it covered the whole creation. And if that's true, then maybe we were never created simply to survive. We were created to rule a world we never had the chance to know. And this is where everything changes. Welcome to Biblioverse, where we explore alternate biblical universes. This is what if Adam and Eve had never sinned? When most people imagine Eden, they picture two people walking among trees, surrounded by gentle animals, living forever in a motionless garden. A perfect postcard frozen in time. But the biblical account suggests something entirely different. Eden doesn't seem to be the final destination. It looks more like a base of operations, an original sanctuary, a place from which something much greater was supposed to begin. Because the original command wasn't, stay here. It was fill the earth. And that completely changes this story, because it implies movement, development, construction, exploration, responsibility. Humanity's original project wasn't preserving a garden. It was extending it. Think for a moment about the implications. A humanity without sin would have begun populating the planet without fear, without violence, and without destructive competition. There would be no borders drawn by war, no empires built through conquest, no slaves raising monuments for kings obsessed with power. The first cities would not be born from fear. They would be born from cooperation. And this is where things begin to spiral out of control. Because we often assume that human progress requires crisis. That innovation depends on scarcity. That creativity flourishes because of suffering. But what if none of that was ever true? The Bible presents Adam, even before the fall, naming animals, organizing his environment, and exercising stewardship over creation. There is work before sin. There is purpose before suffering. There is culture before rebellion. And that completely changes this story, because it means technology would not be a consequence of the fall. Neither would science. Neither would art. Neither would architecture. Perhaps they would still exist, only without corruption. Imagine scientists conducting research not to create weapons, but to better understand the universe. Imagine architects designing cities where beauty matters just as much as functionality. Imagine musicians creating without ambition or ego. Imagine leaders incapable of using power for personal gain. Because the problem was never knowledge itself. It was the human heart. Then an even more unsettling question emerges. How far was humanity meant to go? Because God didn't say, fill one region. He said, fill the earth. But the earth is enormous. And an immortal humanity would have had time. A great deal of time. Centuries, millennia, tens of thousands of years. And here we encounter a possibility that is almost never discussed. What if humanity's original potential was far greater than we can imagine? A civilization without wars would not lose entire generations to conflict. A civilization without disease would not devote immense resources to combating epidemics. A civilization without corruption would not waste talent. Each generation would begin where the previous one ended, without resets caused by human catastrophe, without collapses driven by greed. And this is where everything changes. Because our history is marked by constant loss. Libraries burned, empires destroyed, knowledge forgotten, geniuses murdered. But a humanity untouched by the fall would preserve every discovery, every breakthrough, every accumulated experience. What would such a species become after 10,000 years? But there is an even more disturbing question. What would happen to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Because according to Genesis, it would still be there, visible, accessible, a symbol that true love requires freedom. And that means something extraordinary. Adam and Eve's obedience would not eliminate the possibility of choice. Choice would still exist. The tree would remain as a reminder that obedience had value precisely because it could be rejected. Then another possibility emerges. Perhaps human history would have consisted of entire generations learning to trust God voluntarily. Not out of fear, not out of necessity, but out of conviction. And that completely changes this story, because many people imagine Eden as a kind of perfect prison. But Genesis describes responsibility, decision-making, and growth, not moral automation. And here another question arises, one that very few people dare to ask. Would Jesus have come into the world anyway? The traditional answer is usually immediate. No, Jesus came to save us from sin. But there's another fascinating perspective. What if the incarnation had always been part of the plan? Not as Redeemer, but as King. Not to die, but to dwell with a faithful humanity. Because this connects to something much greater. The final book of the Bible ends with God dwelling among human beings. The divine presence fully shared with creation. And some theologians have noticed something remarkable. The end of the story looks a lot like the beginning. A restored world, a reconciled humanity, God with his people, and so an extraordinary possibility emerges. Perhaps the cross was God's answer to the problem of sin. But intimacy between God and humanity was always the original destination. And this is where things begin expanding far beyond Eden. Because if humanity's purpose was to extend divine order throughout creation, then the garden was never enough. It was the first step, the prototype, the model, a small portion of the world showing what everything else was meant to become. And that completely changes this story. Because perhaps we were never designed to escape the earth. We were designed to transform it, to turn deserts into gardens, to build communities founded on justice, to develop the hidden potential woven into creation, to reflect God's character through stewardship and care, not to conquer in order to exploit, but to rule in order to serve. Then an uncomfortable question emerges. How much of our potential did we actually lose? Because we usually measure the fall in moral terms. But perhaps it also represented a dramatic reduction in what humanity could have become. Every war destroyed possibilities. Every act of corruption diverted resources. Every generation shaped by hatred passed wounds onto the next. We didn't just lose innocence. We lost a future. And this is where everything changes. Because perhaps the saddest what if in the entire Bible isn't imagining a world without funerals. Perhaps it's imagining everything we never had the chance to build. The cities that never existed. The discoveries we never made. The beauty we never created. The harmony we never experienced. The human potential we never reached. All because two people chose to claim for themselves the right to define good and evil on their own terms. And yet, the biblical narrative itself leaves behind an unexpected clue. The story does not end in a lost garden. It ends with a city, a new creation, a place where the tree of life and the presence of God appear once again. As though the original project had never been canceled, only interrupted, as though Eden was never the final destination, but merely the preview of something far greater. Now I want to know what you think. If Adam and Eve had never sinned, what do you think humanity would look like today after thousands of years spent expanding Eden across the earth? Would we have achieved a civilization beyond imagination? Or would we still face entirely different challenges? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you're fascinated by alternate biblical universes that uncover hidden possibilities within Scripture, follow the channel and subscribe so you can join us for the next scenario. Because one decision, just one decision, can change everything. Until next time,